Welcome to Minority Trip Report. MTR is a podcast spotlighting stories of personal transformation and underrepresented leaders in mental health, psychedelics, and consciousness. I'm your host, Raj Siraj. If you're learning from or enjoying Minority Trip Report, please subscribe to MTR on YouTube at Minority Trip Report and follow us on Instagram at Minority Trip. Thank you and enjoy the episode. Today, my guest is Shaunt Raffi, who is an Armenian music curator, DJ, musician, and producer based in Toronto. Shaunt is the founder of some of Toronto's most iconic community hubs for artists, including Antica and Oud and the Fuzz. He has now turned his attention to his newest venture, Tapestry, which functions as a music venue in the heart of Toronto's Kensington Market. Shaunt has dedicated himself to simultaneously developing his own artistry while also providing space for others to shine and grow. He has always placed a huge focus on highlighting Armenian and Swana culture in everything that he touches. Shaunt, thank you for being here.
It's an absolute pleasure, man. Happy to be here.
Okay, so I figured we'd start at the most important thing that I can think of right now. I mean, it was many things to discuss, but like the thing that comes top of mind that I'm really excited to speak with you about is, what is your favorite System of a Down track?
Oh, man. I knew this was coming. It's crazy. I was just actually today listening to a podcast with Sedge, the singer, with Rick Rubin.
Yeah, that one. I haven't met you.
Yeah. So he just wrote a new book. So they were going through the thick of it, man. I have so many incredible memories attached to so many System of a Down songs. I'd probably have to go with Ariel's or Chop Suey as my top favorites, but that band just means so much to me, man. They're amazing.
It's so amazing to be able to talk on the podcast about somebody who loves System as much as I do. And of course you have a different kind of connection. Yeah. But this band, I bought the book and I was actually thinking so far, I was already in New York last week. I'm like, fuck it, I'll just stay a couple extra days just to see Serge and his book, and then shake his hand and just say how much his music meant to me. I was verge of tears just thinking about that idea. Ultimately, I couldn't do it, but I'm reading his book, and even just the first chapter, he talks about that moment when Toxicity came out. It was 9/11 just happened. And Serge is very outspoken about his ideas. And he understands that, hey, it's not just good guys, bad guys, all the darkies are bad guys and shit like that. He understands American imperialism, but this caused such a huge rift with his bandmates who were kind of scared about what was going to happen. But there's all these things that I want to talk to you about. But tell me, why is System of a Down such a national treasure for Armenians, Armenian diaspora, Armenian culture, but also for you and your brother personally?
Yeah, man. Honestly, there's so much I could say about this. Ultimately, I think System of a Down represents being able to see ourselves as Armenians, represented in sort of that mainstream context, right? Having people that look like us, that sound like us, that grew up like us, be able to go past just our little bubble, of the Armenian community, and, still maintain their sense of culture, still maintain that fight for justice and that activism, but be able to just, cross so many boundaries and reach such a large audience. So inspiring. You don't see a lot of Armenians being represented in that context. To have a band like System of a Down who was able to accomplish that, to me, is absolutely incredible. I first saw and met System of a Down when I was 10 years old in Toronto at the Molson Amphitheater. I had some family friends who knew the band. They were able to take me to the show, take me backstage, meet the band. I got to watch the show from backstage.
Amazing.
It was one of the most epic experiences of my life. I think that really changed me and the trajectory of my life for sure. And yeah, they really mean a lot. And when they played their show in Armenia for the 100th anniversary of the genocide, that performance was special on a lot of levels. But one of the things that was really cool about it is that we always felt that their music was familiar and different than, a lot of the rock music and metal music that you hear out there. But what they did during that show was really bring to the forefront the Armenian influence of their music, which had been very subtle, but they made it a lot more
Mm.
obvious in that performance. And so there was just like certain moments where they would like really lean into some of those Armenian riffs, which were directly like sampled from like folk music that we
Mm.
grew up listening to. And you were just like, holy shit. And yeah, it was just crazy because then you see metalheads all over the fucking world rocking out to that music, and it's sampled from a fucking folk song that I grew up listening to. So yeah, shit like that was just really cool to discover about that band. And it just added this like other layer of why they're so important and so iconic.
Man, even though I'm not Armenian, I think there's so much of what you said I resonate with so strongly. Growing up, you didn't see four brown guys that are so hairy at the same time, that look so
Fuck yeah.
different, that were like from
Yeah.
Lebanon, from Iraq, from like all the diaspora people that look different, sound different. They played brutal heavy metal
Yeah.
and still so catchy. And yet the melodies that I related to as a South Asian, right? Like a lot of the melodies, the sort of like the
Absolutely.
melancholy of, I think, South Asian or Eastern melodies, it was there,
Totally.
but coupled with this
Totally.
brutal rock and roll, but also schizophrenic quality. Like they go from like
Absolutely.
frantic to like deeply sad to deeply joyous in the same song.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and it was so empowering to see that these guys can make the music on their terms and yet be so immensely popular that, to your point, white guys are dancing to or headbanging to or like moshing to. It's like, what the hell? And it's like all of
Totally.
a sudden it allowed guys like me to dream. Wow, holy shit. It's like my imagination has been cracked open because I see these four guys
No
on the
doubt.
stage, right?
No doubt.
And of course, the other element that I also want to touch on is I think their vocal advocacy to recognize the Armenian genocide, that it still to this day goes unrecognized when it's of Turkey, parallel to what is happening right now. And then Bangladesh, as a Bangladeshi myself, we also faced a genocide in 1971. 3 million people are in 9 months. A lot of people don't know this, not recognized by the state of
Absolutely.
Pakistan to this day. And so again, to hear Serge and the rest of the band and Darren talking about it, wow, holy shit. Relatable on so many levels.
Yeah, yeah, it's truly incredible the fact that they were able to accomplish that level of commercial success while being so honest and vocal at the same time. You don't see that happen. It's it still blows my mind to this
Mm,
day that they were able to accomplish that. It's definitely like a beacon in a lot of ways. It's definitely something that I try and model. I definitely think that the time and place that they came up played a big role in them being able
mm.
to succeed in doing that. I find it very hard to replicate today in the context that we live in, but nonetheless, it's something to look up to and to strive
Tell
for
me a little
sure.
bit about that. We're going to talk, later about your role and your ambition to be this curator, particularly using music as a way to connect people. And I was like, why do you think it'd be hard to replicate Nine? Or don't you feel that for a band, timing couldn't be better for a band like System to come back?
Yeah, in certain respects, for sure, the timing could not be better. I think I don't know. It's hard. It's hard to put into words. Uh, there's obviously just a level of sensitivity that's gotten to an absurd
Mm,
place. I think the honesty that System of a Down reflected through their activism and their art is definitely
mm,
necessary in today's world. But the ability, I think, to couple that with the same level of commercial success that they had, I think is a lot more
mm,
difficult. Um, the reason I don't know if I can exactly put my finger on, but it could sort of be because of just how public, I guess, our lives have become.
mm,
And especially there's a great degree of difficulty in separating your personal life from your art. People expect to group all of that together. And I think that just adds like an added layer of complexity to being able to have your activism and your art be accepted in a commercial sense.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I think on one hand, you have this infinite buffet of whatever you want to consume. On the other hand, it's become so boxed in, so homogenized, so categorized or productized, right? It's like you can be, and then System of a Down is the antithetical to that. It's everything that these things are.
Absolutely.
It's like how many genres is it across?
Absolutely.
How many different styles does it mix? How many different ideas is it, mixed together? So I take your point. I think, one of the aspects that I want to touch on with you is, again, this idea of being a diaspora Armenian. What does System of a Down represent? But also, I think like when you first went to Armenia, you were telling me that it was the first time that you didn't have to carry this cultural burden that you had to carry for a long time, showcasing Armenian culture. And this is all in the backdrop of a genocide that still, to your point, goes unrecognized, right? We all carry that burden. I carry it in a different way. You carry it certainly. Tell me about the time that you did go back to Armenia and what was that experience like? I think you were the person
Yeah.
in your family since the genocide to visit Armenia, which is, I can't even imagine what it's like.
Yeah, I was the first person in my family to live there since the genocide, to spend like an extended period of time there. And it was an incredibly profound experience. It definitely changed the trajectory of my life, and I'm so grateful to have had that experience. What the thing that I think was the most pivotal was the fact that growing up as an Armenian in the diaspora in Toronto, I had sort of two modes of existence. I was lucky enough to have a community center here and a school where I could go to and be Armenian within that context. And then I would leave the community center or the school, and I was, just living in Toronto and just trying to fit in or just trying to be white. Like,
Ooh,
it was be Armenian within the context of the community center or pretend to be white. These were like my two modes of existence. And I didn't know any better. I didn't know any different. When I went to Armenia for the first time, and I not for the first time, but when I lived there and I started to do ordinary things like walk to work, go to the grocery store, and I could do those things as an Armenian, it sort of unlocked a part of my
ooh,
brain where it made me realize that being Armenian is not something about myself that I can control. It's just who I
ooh.
am. Whether I'm grocery shopping in Armenia or I'm grocery shopping in Toronto, I'm doing that as an Armenian because that's not something I can control,
Right.
right? I just have to accept and embrace that about myself. But I had to first feel what that was like in order to be able to do that outside of Armenia. I had to feel what it was like to just exist as an Armenian and not have to be it something that I had to like consciously practice. And so that opportunity to live there unlocked that part of my brain. And I was able to take that feeling with me now wherever I go. And I'm very grateful for that because there was a lot that within the context of the community center here, being Armenian was something that was very much put into a box, right? It's like you do these specific things, you are a part of if you're a part of the Armenian youth organization, you go to the Armenian school and you come to the community center, a certain times a week and you go to the protests and you do these things, then you're Armenian.
Ooh,
If you don't, you're not Armenian, right? And it's like, what? But I didn't know any
ooh.
different. I didn't know any different. And I was able to understand that I can be whoever the fuck I want to be. I could do whatever I want to do, and I'm still gonna be Armenian, you know? So yeah, that was a powerful experience that I'm very grateful I had.
I think when you're a diaspora person, whether you're Armenian or Bangladeshi, I feel like it's hard to be a rebel initially as you're trying to figure out who the hell are you actually, right? Because you're like, on one hand, I'm unapologetically Bangladeshi, but I'm also like I don't live in the enclave. I can't relate to the people who live in the enclave, the hive. To your point, it's very binary. So you do these things. If you're not, you're get out of community. You're like a heathen, right? It takes a while because there's a lot to juggle. How did you process that sort of sense of friction between being an Armenian on your own terms, but also here's everything that you grew up with, that says you're Armenian? but you don't really want to fit into that mold.
I think what really led me to understand that was compassion.
Mm,
And I had to have a sense of compassion for my parents and the older members of my community were creating the environment that they did that I grew up in. And the reason why I say compassion is because these people were doing the best they could with the hand that they were
right,
dealt. The people who run the diaspora and Armenian community centers around the world are people who were, you know, continuously displaced for
right.
generations, right? If you just take my family as an example, like post genocide on my dad's side, they ended up in Turkey, in Lebanon, you know, both of these places were difficult places to be as Armenians. And then these places, they themselves experienced war, revolution, you know. On my mom's side, they ended up in Iran. Again, same thing, you know, war, revolution. For fucking generation after generation, you're being displaced. You're dealing with war. You're dealing with, you know, a deep sense of struggle, a huge lack of peace, all the while understanding the fact that the reason why you're in this position is because of a genocide that is going unnoticed, not being talked about, you know, not being recognized. The complexity that creates in your mind is extremely difficult to cope with. And so you're going to do whatever you can to just deal with those situations and try and provide a sense of security for yourself and for your family and for your community and just keep moving forward. Right. And I think when you come so close to losing something that's very dear to you,
Mm,
right? The Armenian culture was very close to just not existing. The fact that I'm here right now is a fucking miracle, you know? And when that happens, and this is something that's extremely precious, your initial instinct as a human being is to protect it at all costs, right? So here's this beautiful, precious culture that we merely save, right? What am I going to do? I'm going to take it. I'm going to put it in a safe.
mm,
Do not come near it. Do not touch it. Do not get close. The problem is that when you do, that thing that you just put in the safe is dying.
mm,
You don't recognize that, right? But it's dying in there. It can't breathe. It can't exist. Um, that kind of clicked in my head, right? Where I was like, I started to redefine what preservation meant, right? Preservation to me no longer meant taking this thing, hiding it, protecting it, keeping it away from people. Preservation for me was redefined as relevance. If I can take this thing and make it as relevant as possible, it preserves itself,
mhm.
right? I don't have to then try so hard, you know? So then it comes down to doing the work to understanding what is relevant and why are those things relevant? And how can I then insert what I love into this so that it's protected?
Mm,
And yeah, I really had to develop a deep sense of compassion for those who weren't doing that work and develop a sense of compassion for those who didn't understand why I was choosing to do the work. When I moved back, it was really interesting because when I moved back from Armenia after having living there for 2 years, I started to feel a huge sense of disconnect from the Armenian community that I grew up with
mm,
here. And a large part of this was because now that I had this understanding of the culture that I really wanted to share with the world, I think a lot of people were scared about the fact I was now putting the culture in this like vulnerable position
mm,
of being out in the world. And they're like, yo, what are you doing? You know, like we almost lost this thing once. Like, why are you putting it out there so freely? You know, I had developed the understanding of why I was doing that, but I also had to understand why people didn't see, you know, and to this day, you know, a majority of the people that support me and my business, even though it's Armenian to its core, are not Armenian. And I understand why that's the case. and I'm okay with it. I've made peace.
There's another interesting parallel here, I'm curious about what you think. I'll use my example. Now, I notice how the Bangladeshi community, let's say in Toronto or in, let's say, diaspora communities all across Toronto, how they operate versus how Bangladeshis in Bangladesh see their own culture. And it's kind of interesting, right? That I think Bangladeshi communities in Toronto, again, I'm talking about the enclaves in general. On one hand, it's a beautiful thing. Like it's such a relief. That relief you're talking about when you were in Armenia, I feel it when I go to Bangla town. Sitting on the street, just drinking a cup of tea, smoking a cigarette, whatever. It's just like whatever, right? It's kind of people hanging out. On the other hand, it's like this culture refuses to evolve, partly due to fear and partly, wanting to preserve the culture, of course. But then if I look at Bangladeshis back home, they're mutating, they're remixing the culture. They're like, we are dreaming of something else. And it's such an interesting parallel, right? In some ways, Bangladeshis in Bangladesh are more free than the Bangladeshis here. And you think they came this far to be free. I don't know if you saw the same thing.
Totally. Absolutely. I mean, I definitely feel that. And to me, it's because most of the Armenians that live outside of Armenia are here today because of the genocide, right? They never chose to leave Armenia. The Armenians who are in present day Armenia never had to deal with that. You know what I mean? They never had to deal with the fact that they were away from their homeland, and they never had to feel the vulnerability associated with being this tiny minority within the context of, a city like Toronto. That's there is fear there for sure. I think the problem is that a lot of what our culture, like yours or like mine, is put up against in a context like Toronto is not something to be scared of. Our culture is so rich, so deep, it's so old, I'm gonna put it out there. It's gonna destroy anything in its path, and at the end of the day, that's also the biggest asset that I have as an Armenian is my culture. My country does not have natural resources. It does not have oil. It does not have natural gas. Those aren't things about the country that I can exploit for the betterment of the country. The only thing that we have is our culture, and so I need to find a way to exploit it for, exploit usually has a negative connotation, but I don't have a choice. You know what I mean? This is the only thing that I have that I can use to fight, to fight for the things that I believe in. And I think it takes time. It takes generations to sort of realize power that culture has and to feel the confidence to put it up against everything that you see around you. It's definitely a scary thing. And I have a lot of compassion for those who feel that fear.
I appreciate that perspective. And in fact, I think you helped me think about, how the culture, when it forks, right? So people who stayed back and the new generation who were born without the direct, let's say, exposure to genocide, it's part of the cultural fabric, of course. People talk about it. There are museums dedicated to it, but then people who have been exposed directly and then chose to move away. And then those stories being passed down to the, subsequent generations and so on. I'm going to come back to this topic because I think, to your point, being Armenian is like part and parcel of everything that you do. So we'll come back to that. I want to pivot a little bit to psychedelics because I think the overlap of psychedelics and identity, and particularly diaspora identity, is really interesting here. Those of us are constantly thinking about it. Who am I? What am I a part of? What am I trying to, further embed with my work and whatever I create? Let's first talk about your exposure to psychedelics. Now, I know for a long time I think you associated with psychedelics with like white hippie culture. And then, your first time taking LSD has been like the thing that you want to talk about and the thing that you highlight as like a pivotal time or a pivotal moment. Tell me about the first time you took LSD. Why was it so meaningful to you? And then, how did your thoughts about psychedelics and, how has it been shaped throughout the last few years?
Yeah, so the first time I took LSD was at a music festival in Michigan called Electric Forest. It was very much like a white hippie context that I did it in. But the reason why I ended up at that festival was because of a friend from Australia who I met in
Mm,
Armenia. So he's Armenian, born in Australia. We happened to be in Armenia at the same time. We became very good friends. And he was coming to this part of the world in order to go to that festival. And it was an opportunity for me to see him post living in Armenia. And that was really why I went, was to go see an Armenian friend, you know. But, in order to fully take part in the experience, I decided to take LSD for the first time. And it was beautiful. The whole festival was a very freeing experience. I was exposed to a lot of like electronic music, which I had kind of kept at arm's length at that festival. And, you know, there were certain moments of just the like dancing with the utmost sense of freedom, which is, I think, a really beautiful and important thing to experience, because then that becomes part of your definition of freedom. It
mm,
becomes part of what you look
mm.
for outside of that experience as what it means and how it feels to be free. Um, and yeah, I think since then, I've definitely indulged in shrooms quite a few times, and have definitely just been more open to consuming drugs and psychedelics in particular. And I think just eliminating sort of some of the fears associated with indulging, and understanding that there definitely are benefits to this, and just allowing myself to experience joy, just to have fun,
Mhm.
having to just be like serious all the time.
I think that's really important. I think fun can be healing in its own way. I think in the world of psychedelics, of course, there's serious traumas and suffering that we have to relieve ourselves from, but it doesn't have to be like serious and dark and hard work all the time.
Yeah.
Just by simply freeing
Yeah.
yourself and being open to whatever's out there around you, having fun and laughing can itself be quite healing. Um,
Absolutely.
You mentioned that psychedelics and mushrooms in particular helped you wean off weed, and you had a really
Mhm.
bad relationship to cannabis. I'm
Yeah.
actually curious about this part because I think a lot of people, I do think it's strange, right? On one hand, I really seriously believe consenting adults should be able to consume whatever the hell they want if it's not harming others. On the other hand, this idea that smoking cannabis in itself, not addictive. It's not chemically addictive, but I feel like it can lead you to that. And speaking as somebody who used to smoke so much cannabis back in university, 6, 7 joints a day, I'd be like high all the time. I don't think I was alive.
Yeah.
What was that like? And what was it, how did mushrooms help you wean off cannabis? And how do you reflect on that time when you were smoking a lot of cannabis?
My relationship with cannabis started at a time in my life when my parents were separating, and I really didn't have a lot to lean on. And that became something for me to lean on. And I'm grateful for it. I think just from that point forward, because the substance entered my life when I was in a certain mindset, I think it sort of carved that place in my life. And from that point forward, I think anytime I felt an emotion that I didn't want to feel, my solution to that was to smoke weed and get high.
Mm,
And I don't think, you know, you should never be using anything to disregard your emotions to that degree, because they're trying to tell you something.
mm,
It's uncomfortable to feel that emotion. There might be a reason for that, and you need to do the work associated with building the courage to feel that emotion, as opposed to just getting high. You know, I think when I decided I was going to stop smoking weed, and I also stopped drinking at the same time, it's been almost 2 years now. I guess I wanted to find a substance that I could indulge in that I hadn't developed a negative relationship with. I think, there's a good chance that if I decide to smoke weed right now, I'm not going to fall back to where I was. But I think that there's just like an internal fear with indulging in with a substance that did have that place in my life. Shrooms became a substance that I felt more comfortable indulging in just because it wasn't present in my life during that
Mhm.
time. And I didn't have that relationship with it. So I felt, because I do think that it's important to indulge. Life is too short to not, I think indulging almost like separates a human from a robot to a certain degree.
Right.
And you have to give yourself those allowances, but also learn how and when to do that, right? And sometimes the substance itself that you're dealing with can be the thing that allows you to build that more positive relationship. And just for where I am in my life right now, shrooms became that substance. Whether or not that's going to change, it very well might, but that's just kind of where I'm at right now.
Totally. It's a really important point that it's not about the drug. It's about the discernment, right? It's about what is your
Absolutely.
relationship to, because it's the same thing is a drug or a medicine. It depends on your relationship to it, right? Having a drink that helps you relax, it's a medicine because it helps you relax. The moment you drink to get away from your suffering, to get away from your feelings, to hide behind other things, and of course, we live in a culture that constantly reinforces certain kind of drugs over others, which is in itself is like the politics of consciousness. What kind of like consciousness are we trying to do in our culture? It's a really important thing to understand. Ultimately, psychedelics don't show you anything new. They show you what's inside you. It shows you a brief door, but it's up to you to walk through that door without it. And even within the psychedelic community, we talk about like, how many more times you need to do ayahuasca, man? You died 30 times. Obviously, you're not listening. What the hell? Again, the substance itself is not addictive, but the sensations of insight, the sensations that you're doing
So
something good is like,
totally.
it can be addictive. I'd smoke weed every now and then, but I think I just do it because the movies are better and the chips taste better. So, how has your relationship? It sounds like you've spent a lot of time understanding yourself. And you have a really, what I really like about what you're saying is that you have a really well developed sense of yourself, of who you are, where boundaries are, where you were, and how you evolved. Tell me a little bit of how, as you've evolved, how has your relationship to your brother, Roz, evolved? You guys are obviously business partners, and being siblings, I think being business partners I'm sure there's lots of friction that comes up, but your relationship to your brother, to your sibling, as a mirror to your own evolution, how do you think about that?
So I think, running business with family is always going to present difficulties. What I'm grateful for, and the thing that I sort of prioritize within the context of that relationship, is if you're going to run business with anybody, especially family, and you're not going to be honest with each
Mm,
other, you're fucked, right? I think what we realized very quickly is how much there had been a lack of honesty and communication within the context of our family growing up, that we just would avoid conflict all costs, you know, and we could get away with it because there wasn't a business on the line that we had invested everything into, right? So when that entered the equation, it brought about this sense of necessity, have to deal with certain things, or else your business is not going to succeed,
mm,
right? And we couldn't afford that. So for the first time in our lives, there was this added layer of necessity to have to deal with certain things that we had been avoiding for so long. And this was within myself and within the context of my relationship. And the two things very much went hand in hand. And so as we continue to progress as business partners and as brothers, the thing that I always try and prioritize and be grateful for and keep at the surface is the fact that the conflict that we engage in is simply because of the fact that we have not been honest with each other and ourselves for a very long time. And either we're going to take this opportunity to engage in that honesty, or our business is going to suffer. Two options here. You know what I mean? And, to this day, we've been business partners for going on 8 years now. To this day, there are things that come up that are a reflection of that, uh, that sense of avoidance, and we just need to identify it, be conscious of it, and work towards solving it in a way that um, is positive in some way, shape, or form. And, it's not perfect every day, that like old habits die hard. Like
Mm.
changing is an extremely difficult thing to do, very difficult thing. But, I've felt the growth that I've been able to experience by being on this journey. And as long as I can see progress within myself, within the business, within my relationship with my brother, then I'll keep going.
Mm.
As long as I see progress, I'll keep going. And so far we've experienced.
Within the context of the medicine, what do you think what have you been able to pull from medicine or the insights or lessons from it that you can apply that I guess others who are contemplating getting into a business venture or something else with their siblings, what can you draw from that? What did the medicine show you?
So to be honest, during the time of the biggest some of the biggest leaps I've made within my life, I wasn't consuming
Mm.
psychedelics, but I was meditating
Mm.
a lot,
Mm.
like a lot. And there's, I think, a lot of parallels between the use of
Absolutely.
psychedelics and
That's
meditation.
true.
I can speak to how meditation helped me within
Mhm.
this context. Um, and for me, it had a lot to do with, just again, sitting with uncomfortable
Mm.
emotions, recognizing that when you take away all of the distractions that we use to not feel the things that we don't want to feel, the other side of that is okay.
Mm.
You know, like when you don't engage in that substance, or you don't engage in that activity, or you don't pick up your phone, and do whatever it is that is going to distract you from that emotion you don't want to feel. When you feel it, it's okay.
Mm.
You're fine. But you need to experience that. I've done like upwards of 3-hour silent meditations where, prior to that, within the span of 3 hours, the amount of times I would have, maybe smoked a joint or checked my phone or, done something to distract me from my thoughts. The list is
Mm.
long, but I gave myself that opportunity to just sit there, you know, and again, to just realize that I was okay, you know, I was just fine. And that did a lot for me. It did a lot for me. I haven't been as frequent with my practice since then, but I think that just that period in my life, really, there was a necessity to have to be as disciplined as I was. And what that did for me, for being able to have a sense of confidence in myself and a deep sense of belief in why I'm doing what I'm doing, why I'm dealing with the stresses and the difficulty of carving my own path. If you don't understand why you're doing that, it could be like you're gonna give up,
Mm.
So that experience gave me an opportunity to really be clear as to why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Innately value your journey and the road ahead, the road you're on is critical. Trusting yourself, trusting decisions, because like any act of creation involves ambiguity, risk, uncertainty. And as you were talking about this, my feeling is that being somewhat of a creative, but I'm not embedded in the way that you are. I feel like the artistic creative world, there's a lot of people with a lot of existential suffering, angst, lots of mental health challenges. On the other hand, people also rely on abuse, substance abuse as the thing that they feel gives them the creative edge, which I don't think is true.
Definitely not.
I think with meditation, things like that, of course, again, use the tool, but don't become the tool, you know, don't let it use you. How do you see your creative community and how do they wrestle with these questions?
Phew, that's a crazy question. When we opened Tapestry, the space itself gave us the opportunity to engage in certain communities and certain styles of music and events that our previous two locations didn't give us the opportunity to engage with. And I would say, mostly it's the electronic music community, which, we finally kind of had a space to host that kind of music, which is something I had definitely wanted. That community is great for business. And one of the reasons for that is the people who show up are very
Mhm.
loyal. And I think part of the reason for that is because there's an opportunity to indulge, right? In a safe
Right.
space, right? Which a lot of people
Mhm.
need,
Mhm.
right? Like I remember when I first started smoking weed, it was like super early in my university career. And again, this was a very difficult time in my life. But a lot of my friends at the time were not necessarily supportive of me indulging, right? So I started hanging out with people who were supportive of that, who wouldn't judge me for indulging. And that was the basis of our relationship. These weren't people that I really had a lot in common with, but I knew that if I spent my Friday night hanging out with them as opposed to
Mhm.
them, I could smoke
Mhm.
weed. And at that point in my life, I needed to fucking smoke
Mhm.
weed. And so that created this loyalty in our
Mhm.
relationship with this particular group of friends. And I find that sometimes the ability to use substance in a safe space creates this loyalty with a lot of people in the electronic music community who will show
Mhm.
up because they know that if they come to that experience and that event, as opposed to going to like the cocktail bar down the street, if they show up on Molly at the cocktail bar down the street, they're going to look at them like, what the fuck's wrong with this person? You know what I mean? But if they go to that rave, no one's going to
Yeah.
judge them, right? Which is a beautiful
Yeah.
thing. But again, I think it's a very slippery slope, right? And that can turn very toxic very quickly. And it's, it sucks because there are, there's a lot of people that are making money off of that
Mhm.
loyalty that's based on indulgence, right? And that's also driving the the music industry and the type of music that's being released and the type of music that's generating
Mhm.
income and money, and the use of substance is all, it's all tied in. I mean, it always
Yeah.
has been like this is nothing
Yeah.
new, you know what I mean? This is definitely nothing new. But I guess that's just something that I've become more conscious of, and recognizing that, I guess, like you said, it's the use of substance, of any substance, is not an integral part of the creative process. It does have a role, and it has always had a role. Some of the music that we hold very near and dear to our heart, some of the artists that
Absolutely.
we hold very near to our heart, are people who have indulged to sometimes, a very toxic
Yeah.
extent. But yeah, again, there's reasons for that. And I think being compassionate about the places that people are in and the ways in which they're coping is extremely important. But I think we should never stop striving for better.
I think the most important thing about what you said is, creating a safe space that is free of judgment. You want to consume, you want to indulge, totally fine. Know that it comes with responsibility, so it does not harm others around you and as well yourself, because you want to be responsible for each other. But also, if you don't consume at all, that's also cool. It doesn't mean that you're straight edge and you're like, you have your head up your ass or anything like that. It's nothing like that, And
For
so
sure.
I think, as curators of art and culture and community, we have that responsibility. Like, how do you imbue into the walls, into the space, into the bar, into the music, all of these values that allow people to come together with, sharing joyous moments without judgment. And also, if you want to get really fucking high, do it. This is the place to be because you're around people who will keep you safe. You know, people are gonna get high no
Absolutely.
matter fucking what. And this is important to it. Us as a huge civilization, the first fucking cave paintings, who the hell knows? Maybe it was carbon monoxide because the fucking fire went on in a cave and like all the oxygen was tapped out. Who knows? We've always
Totally.
gone high, right? So how
Totally.
do we do it safely, without judgment, without shame? So much fucking shame. Let me ask you this: bringing it all together, Sean. You know, you as an Armenian curator, creator, musician, somebody who holds a community, and like so many people, including myself, are big fans of what you've created. Not just Antica, Food and Fuzz, and now Tapestry. It's a place that a lot of people go. How do you bring it all together? You talked about wanting people to care about Armenia, Armenians, the genocide, your story, the story of people, without screaming at them. How do you get them to understand it? But again, in a way that feels natural, that allows people to embody it themselves without being lectured at. How does it all? What is your recipe? What is the secret to your success so far? And then to whoever's listening, whoever wants to create spaces in Toronto, what do you have to say to them? How can somebody go about it?
So I think first and foremost that one of the things that drives me is a quote by Nina Simone, which states, "It's the duty of an artist to reflect the times in which we live." This is something that I will die
Mm,
by, you know. And there's so much to unpack there, right? In order to reflect the times in which you live, that requires
mm,
presence, right? If you are not present in understanding the world around you, how the hell are you going to reflect that in your work, right? Once you do the work to be present, then there's going to be a natural reflection of the world that you live in and the work that you create, right? And I have done my best and continue to do my best to cultivate a sense of presence in my life in order to be in tune with the world around me. And so whatever I create is a reflection of that. I think that's incredibly important. When it comes to the Armenian culture and reflecting that in the work that I do, in the way that I do it, with the goals that I have, it simply comes down to seeing myself as not an Armenian, but as a human
mm,
being with access to Armenian
mm,
culture. I'm lucky to be a human being who has access to this culture that not a lot of people have access to. And I just think it's beautiful. I just genuinely, honestly think that it's beautiful. And I want to share it with people, right? I think through that, through sharing things that are beautiful, what you cultivate is love. And when you cultivate love, you cultivate care, right? If I want people to care about the Armenian, people need to fall in love with Armenians and they need to fall in love with the culture. So I do my best to show things about the culture that allow for people to fall in love with it, right? I use this example all the time, like when the the Notre Dame in Paris
mm,
was caught on fire, right? The outpouring of support and financial aid to restore that building was immense, right? And, there's a lot of layers to this, but ultimately there's a sense of love from around the world, from, Parisians and non-Parisians for that
mm,
culture and wanted to protect it. They wanted to preserve it, you know? Um, I try and sort of do my part in in cultivating that towards my culture and cultures like mine who don't have that immediate or obvious sense of appreciation from the average person living in a city like Toronto, and mostly just due to ignorance. Um, the other thing that I will mention for anybody who wants to engage in this type of work is one of the things that I've had to come to understand is a lot of what put us in the position that we're in were things that happened generationally, right? There was generations of suffering on a multitude of different levels in a multitude of different places that put me in the position that I'm in today. I think it's incredibly important to be cognizant of that, to stop certain cycles, to break out of certain things, but to also just be a little bit gentle with yourself and understand that you are not going to solve, 4, 5, 6, or God knows how many generations of struggle within the context of your life. And I think that it's incredibly shallow and ignorant to expect to see the results of your work within your own lifetime. And I think that there needs to be a greater degree of selflessness when it comes to doing this type of work, and understanding that if you move the baton from here to here, your job is done. You know what I mean? There's that idea of seeing the results of your work within your own lifetime needs to be thrown out the window completely.
I so agree
And
with you on that.
I,
Yeah.
you know
Yeah.
what I mean? And it eliminates pressure, A, and, B, it also allows you to just be like, okay, yeah, this is my life. I'm also just going to have fun too. You know what I mean? I'm going to enjoy myself too. And, when I can, I'm going to dedicate myself to this. I'm going to move things forward in the direction that I see fit, and just make it a little bit easier for the next generation when they come along. That's it. That's it.
Mhm.
I don't want anything more. I don't want anything less. And I think for anybody who is looking to engage in this type of work, for it to be their career, they really have to understand that, to be okay with that, to make peace with that, and make sure that within all of the difficulty that comes with it, that they find moments to enjoy themselves, and to take their head out of their ass and look at things from a bigger picture, and just be okay with it.
Amen to that, man. It's like you're both powerful, but also we're just monkeys on a giant rock hurling through the abyss,
100%. 100%. Yeah,
You gotta
absolutely.
have fun, man. You
Absolutely.
gotta have fun because I think, our ancestors suffered so we can be free. And the point to be free is sometimes just be present and have fun, right? There's responsibility there,
No
certainly,
doubt.
but we also got to be present. Dude, I love this so
Yes.
much. Closing comments. Tell us a little bit about how we can find you, how we can find Tapestry. And then when's the next party, man?
All right, man. Tapestry is located in Kensington Market, 224 Augusta. We have live music here, 5 to 6 times a week. You can follow us on Instagram, tapestry_TO. Stay up to date. We function here as not a bar, but an event space, as a venue. So if you're looking to host an event, if you have an idea for a new concept in the city, please feel free to reach out. We're looking for more people to collaborate with from that perspective. And yeah, so that's definitely how the business functions. Personally, outside of the context of the business, I'm a DJ. You can catch me spinning all around the city. I'm spinning at Jazz Fest this year. I just booked that
Nice.
gig at June 26th at the main stage. Super excited about that. And I also host an event, sometimes at Tapestry, but also not always, called the Tapestry Jam. This has its own Instagram account. It's tapestry_jam. This is an event where I invite 4 musicians who have never met or played together before to come together and do a night of completely improvised music. We've created a lot of magic through this event. It's always a ton of fun. This happens the last Sunday of every month. Again, you can follow us on Instagram to find out where in the city it's happening. One of our goals is to take this event to places that don't normally host live music, and, sharpen our elbows and make some room for ourselves. Yeah, you can stay up to date with that. And that's an event that has a lot of my intention for what I do tied up in it. It's one night of the month where I make very little compromise as to, why I do what I do and why I deal with the struggles of being an entrepreneur. Because in that process, there are a lot of compromises to make, but you need to make sure that you carve out time for yourself where you're not making any compromises. And for me, that's the last Sunday of every month. Would love to have more people be a part of it.
Beautiful. Shaunt, thanks so much, man. Really appreciate it. I love everything that you're doing, the thoughtfulness behind everything that you do. And it's been a pleasure. And I'm so stoked to spend more time at Tapestry and hang out together too.
No doubt, man. I welcome it.
This podcast was brought to life with the help of Carolyn Tripp on art and design. Thanks so much for listening to Minority Trip Report. If you're learning from or enjoying the podcast, please subscribe to MTR on YouTube at Minority Trip Report and follow us on Instagram at Minority Trip. It's a zero-cost way to support us and help us spread the word. Please also sign up with your email for new episode announcements, events, as well as our forthcoming newsletter. I'm your host, Raj Suraj. See you next time.